After years of choosing solitude over shallow connections, something extraordinary can happen. Something most people never talk about. Something that doesn't fit the narrative we've been sold. Two people who've spent decades alone, not because they're broken, but because they've learned that peace is more valuable than popularity, can meet. And when they do, it's not fireworks, it's not drama, it's not two halves finally becoming whole. It's recognition, like looking into a mirror that reflects not just your light, but also your exhaustion, your relief when plans are cancelled, your need for silence the way others need conversation. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "A person can only be themselves when they're alone, and if they don't love solitude, they won't love freedom." But what happens when two people who found that freedom finally recognize it in each other? It's not about discovering someone new, it's about remembering something ancient, where you look at another person and think, "You've been exhausted by the same things I have. You understand why I need silence like oxygen." And here's the part that changes everything. Alone souls don't need each other. They recognize each other. And there's a psychology behind this kind of meeting that most people will never understand. Let me explain what's actually happening here, because this isn't about romance in the way we've been taught to understand it. This isn't about two incomplete people trying to fill each other's voids. This is about something far more rare, something that only happens when two people have already done the hardest work, learning to be whole on their own. Most relationships are built on a foundation of need. Two people come together because each feels that something is missing, something is lacking, and the other person seems to promise to fill that void. But when alone souls meet, the foundation is entirely different. It's not built on need, it's built on recognition, and that changes everything. What if the reason you've spent years preferring your own company isn't because you're incapable of connection? What if it's because you've been waiting for a connection that doesn't drain you? What if your exhaustion from small talk, your relief when plans are cancelled, your need for silence like oxygen, isn't a flaw in your design? What if it's the design itself? Schopenhauer understood this deeply. He wrote about how the richness of one's inner world is inversely proportional to the need for external stimulation. People with complex or deep inner lives don't need constant social interaction because they already have an entire universe within themselves. They're not avoiding connection. They're protecting their energy from connections that take more than they give. And when two people like this meet, something shifts. Because for the first time, they're not performing. They're not translating themselves into a language someone else can understand. They're not dimming their need for quiet or apologizing for their preference for solitude. They're just being, and the other person understands, not because they've been told, but because they feel the same way. It wasn't always this way. I remember someone telling me once about a moment that changed how they saw connection entirely. They'd spent decades thinking they were broken because they didn't crave what everyone else seemed to crave. Parties felt like performances. Dinners felt like chores. Even close friendships, while valued, required a kind of energy expenditure that left them drained for days. And then they met someone who didn't ask them to explain why they needed so much time alone. Someone who didn't take it personally when they needed to retreat into their sanctuary. Someone who understood that silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Their need for solitude wasn't a flaw. It was a preference, a deeply rooted, legitimate preference for peace over chaos, for depth over breadth, for quality over quantity. And when they met someone who shared that preference, it wasn't about finally being saved from loneliness. It was about finally being seen. After years of feeling guilty for cancelling plans, for not texting back immediately, for choosing a quiet evening at home over a crowded restaurant, they met someone who felt relief at the same things. Someone who understood that socializing, for them, wasn't energizing. It was exhausting. And that wasn't something to fix. It was something to honor. This kind of meeting is also a way of living. It's a way of saying, I don't need you to complete me. I need you to recognize me. And in that recognition, there's a freedom that most people never experience. There's a psychology behind this that most people never understand, and it has to do with what Schopenhauer called the burden of sociability. For most people, social interaction is a source of energy. It recharges them. It makes them feel alive. But for people with rich inner worlds, with high sensitivity, with deep introspective capacity, social interaction is a performance. It's a translation. It's work. And after decades of performing, after years of translating themselves into a version that others can digest, they stop. Not because they're giving up on connection, but because they're choosing a different kind of connection. One that doesn't require performance. One that doesn't require translation. One that allows them to breathe. History is full of people like this. Writers who spent months in isolation. Philosophers who chose solitude over society. Artists who created their greatest works in the quiet corners of their own minds. They weren't antisocial. They weren't broken. They were protecting something precious. They were guarding their peace. They were preserving their energy for what mattered most to them. And when two people like this meet, they don't need to explain any of that, because the other person already knows. They've lived it. They've felt it. They've made the same choice. And in that shared understanding, there's a depth of connection that most people spend their entire lives searching for. Still, here's a curiosity. What are they protecting themselves from? What makes solitude so necessary that they've built their entire lives around it? And why does meeting someone who understands that feel less like falling in love and more like coming home? The answer has 3 layers, and each one reveals something profound about how alone souls experience the world. First, they're protecting their energy from people who take more than they give. After decades of social interactions that left them feeling drained, they've learned to recognize the difference between connections that nourish and connections that deplete. Most social interactions, for them, fall into the second category, not because people are bad, but because the performance required to maintain those interactions is exhausting. Smiling when they don't feel like smiling, making small talk when they crave depth, pretending to enjoy crowds when all they want is quiet. It's not sustainable, and they've stopped trying to sustain it. Second, they're protecting their trust. Because for people who feel deeply, who think deeply, who process the world with a kind of intensity that most people don't understand, trust isn't given easily. It's earned. And it's earned through consistency, through understanding, through a willingness to meet them where they are instead of asking them to be somewhere else. When they meet someone who doesn't ask them to change, who doesn't judge their need for solitude, who doesn't make them feel broken for preferring their own company, that trust begins to form, not quickly, but deeply. Third, they're protecting their preference for peace. Because here's a secret they rarely say out loud. They genuinely prefer being alone. Not because they're afraid of connection, but because solitude, for them, is where they feel most themselves. It's where they think most clearly. It's where they create, reflect, process, and grow. Their home isn't a hiding place. It's a sanctuary. And when they meet someone who treats it the same way, who understands that their need for quiet isn't rejection, it's self-preservation, something shifts. Because for the first time, they don't have to choose between connection and peace. They can have both. And here's what most people don't realize. Alone souls don't avoid connection because they don't value it. They avoid shallow connection because they value deep connection too much. They'd rather have one person who truly understands them than 100 people who only know the version of them they perform. And when they meet that one person, when they finally encounter someone who sees them, not the mask they wear, but the soul beneath it, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, it's gentle, it's like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. If you are someone who has spent decades feeling exhausted by crowds, drained by small talk, relieved when plans are cancelled, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know the weight of performing. You know the cost of translating yourself into a language others can understand. You know the loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't really see you. And you know the quiet, almost sacred relief of finally being alone again. Let me shift for a moment and speak directly to you. Not about you. To you. What if nothing is wrong with you? What if the years you've spent preferring your own company, the decades you've spent choosing solitude over shallow connections, the lifetime you've spent feeling different, weren't wasted? What if they were preparation? I spent years thinking I was broken. I'd watch people around me laugh in groups, make plans, text constantly, and I'd wonder, why don't I want that? Why does the idea of a crowded party fill me with dread instead of excitement? Why do I feel more alive in the silence of my own home than in the noise of a social gathering? And then I realized something. Solitude isn't loneliness. It's a state of mind. It's a choice. It's a preference for depth over distraction, for peace over performance, for clarity over chaos. And when you've spent years cultivating that inner world, when you've built a life that doesn't exhaust you, when you've finally stopped apologizing for needing space, you're not broken, you're whole. Schopenhauer wrote that a person can only be themselves when they're alone. And if they don't love solitude, they won't love freedom. Because solitude is freedom. It's the freedom to think without interruption, to feel without judgment, to exist without performance. And when you've found that freedom, when you've tasted that peace, you don't give it up easily. But here's what changes everything. What if you could share that freedom with someone? What if you could meet someone who doesn't threaten your solitude, but enhances it? Someone who understands that your need for silence isn't rejection, it's oxygen. Someone who doesn't ask you to change, but recognizes you exactly as you are. At 50, 60, 70, you've earned the right to choose peace. You've spent decades trying to fit into a world that values extroversion, constant connection, and endless social performance. And you've realized it's not for you. And that's not failure, that's wisdom. And now it's time to talk directly to you. Because maybe you are one of these people. Maybe you've spent years wondering if you'll ever meet someone who understands. Maybe you've convinced yourself that the kind of connection you crave doesn't exist, that people like you are meant to be alone, not because you want to be, but because no one else seems to understand what you need. But here's the truth. It doesn't mean you never get lonely. It doesn't mean solitude is always easy. It doesn't mean there aren't moments when you wonder if you're missing something, but there's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the ache of feeling unseen. Solitude is the peace of being whole. And when you've spent years learning the difference, when you've built a life around that peace, you're not waiting for someone to save you from loneliness. You're waiting for someone who recognizes your wholeness. While others fear missing out, you've discovered the joy of opting out. You've learned that rest isn't laziness, stillness isn't stagnation, silence isn't emptiness. Your home is your sanctuary, your own company is your comfort, your peace is your power. And when you meet someone who understands that, who values that, who shares that, it's not about finally being rescued from isolation, it's about finally being recognized. And that recognition gives you strength. Because for the first time, you're not defending your choices, you're not explaining your preferences, you're not apologizing for who you are, you're just being. And the other person is just being. And in that shared space of authentic presence, there's a depth of connection that most people never experience. There is something important still waiting to be said. Because this kind of meeting, this kind of recognition, isn't just about romantic connection. It's about understanding the architecture of your own soul. People who love solitude, who need silence like oxygen, who feel drained by crowds and energized by their own company, aren't avoiding life. They're living it on their own terms. And when you understand the psychology behind that, when you see the layers beneath the surface, everything shifts. First, there's energy management. After a lifetime of performing socially, of forcing themselves to enjoy things they didn't enjoy, of pretending to be energized by interactions that left them exhausted, they've learned to protect their energy, not selfishly, strategically, because they know that their energy is finite. And they'd rather spend it on things that matter, who matter, on moments that nourish instead of deplete. When they meet someone who manages their energy the same way, who understands that socializing is a chore, not a joy, who doesn't take it personally when they need to retreat, there's a mutual respect that forms the foundation of something real. Second, there's trust and vulnerability. For people who've been misunderstood for most of their lives, who've been told they're too quiet, too distant, too cold, trust doesn't come easily because they've learned that most people don't understand them. Most people judge them. Most people try to change them. But when they meet someone who doesn't do any of that, who sees their need for solitude as a strength, not a flaw, who values their depth instead of fearing it, trust begins to form, slowly, carefully, but deeply. Third, there's the complexity of their inner life. Schopenhauer believed that people with rich inner worlds don't need constant external stimulation because they already have an entire universe within themselves. They think deeply. They feel deeply. They process the world with a kind of intensity that most people don't understand. And that intensity requires space. It requires silence. It requires solitude. When they meet someone who has that same complexity, who values depth over distraction, who understands that silence isn't emptiness but fullness, there's a recognition that goes beyond words. Because they see in the other person the same inner richness they've cultivated in themselves. Fourth, there's control over their environment. After decades of feeling overwhelmed by crowds, drained by noise, exhausted by the demands of social performance, they've learned to create environments that protect their peace. Their home is their sanctuary. Their routines are their rituals. Their boundaries are their safety. And when they meet someone who respects those boundaries, who doesn't try to pull them out of their sanctuary, but joins them in it, there's a sense of safety that allows true intimacy to form. Sometimes the reason they love solitude so much is because the world once disappointed them, because they tried to connect and were misunderstood, because they opened up and were judged, because they showed their depth and were told they were too much, and so they retreated. Not because they gave up on connection, but because they chose to protect their peace until they found someone who could meet them where they are. And protecting your peace isn't weakness, it's emotional wisdom. It's knowing what you need and honoring it. It's refusing to settle for connections that deplete you just because society says you should. It's choosing solitude over loneliness, freedom over performance, clarity over chaos. Picture this. You're standing at your window, watching life continue outside. People rushing to appointments, cars honking, crowds gathering, and you feel nothing. Not dread, not envy, just peace, because you're exactly where you want to be. In the quiet sanctuary of your own home, in your own company, in your own rhythm. Society glorifies constant connection as if solitude is failure, as if being alone means being lonely, as if needing space means being broken. But rest is part of growth. Stillness is part of clarity. Silence is part of wisdom. And the people who understand that, who've built their lives around that, aren't missing out. They're opting in to a different kind of life, a quieter life, a deeper life, a life that doesn't exhaust them. And there's a quality in that, a kind of self-companionship that most people never develop. Because they're too busy filling the silence with noise, too busy filling their calendars with obligations, too busy performing for an audience that doesn't really see them. But you're not performing anymore. You're being. And in that being, there's a freedom that most people spend their entire lives searching for. Your cat curled beside you understands more than most people ever will. Because your cat doesn't judge your silence, doesn't ask you to explain why you need space, doesn't make you feel guilty for choosing peace. And when you meet a person who offers that same unconditional presence, who doesn't demand performance, who values your quiet strength, it's not about finally being saved from loneliness. It's about finally being seen. You are not strange for needing silence like oxygen. You are not broken for feeling drained by crowds. You are not selfish for protecting your energy. You are not cold for preferring your own company. You are not missing out for choosing solitude over shallow connections. You are not failing at life for building a life that doesn't exhaust you. You are whole. You are wise. You are free. And you are building a life that honors who you actually are, not who the world thinks you should be. One day, you might meet someone who understands all of that, not because you've explained it, but because they've lived it. And when that happens, it won't be dramatic. It won't be fireworks. It won't be two halves finally becoming whole. It will be two whole people recognizing each other. And in that recognition, there will be a peace, a freedom, a clarity that you've been searching for your entire life. You've earned this peace. After decades of trying to fit in, of forcing yourself to enjoy things you didn't enjoy, of apologizing for needing space, you've finally stopped. And in that stopping, you've found something most people never find, yourself. And when you meet someone who's found themselves too, who values their solitude the way you value yours, who understands that silence isn't emptiness but sanctuary, you'll know. Not because they'll tell you, but because you'll feel it. In the quiet, in the stillness, in the peace. If this resonates with you, if you want to go even deeper into understanding the psychology of solitude, the beauty of chosen silence, and the strength that comes from being whole on your own, there's more waiting for you here. Another conversation, another layer, just for you. This is Alone Together, a quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections. If you're here, you're not broken, you're just built differently. And you're not alone in being alone.